The ship shook so hard that my teeth cracked against each other, and for the first time in 300 years, I did not know if I would live through the next minute. Fire poured through the broken hull behind me. Smoke rolled across the corridor in thick black waves, and somewhere above us, the enemy ships were tearing through our defense line like claws through paper. I pressed my back against a bent metal wall and gripped my weapon with both hands, waiting for the next wave of attackers to break through the door. Beside me stood a human, a small, soft creature with pale skin and wide eyes, breathing hard, blood on her sleeve. Her name was Elena Marsh, and she was gripping her rifle so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. I remember thinking, in that terrible moment, that she would be the first of us to die. I was wrong about almost everything that day, but I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Threll. I am a warrior of the Kryvith, a people who have fought in the stars for longer than most species have known how to walk upright. We do not raise our voices in fear. We do not tremble. We do not cling to one another when danger comes close. From the moment a Kryvith child can stand, they are taught that fear is a weakness to be burned away, cut out like a diseased limb. By the time we reach adulthood, most of us can no longer feel it at all. We call this control. We call it strength. I called it strength, too, before I met the humans. It began 3 weeks earlier, when the Star Alliance Council announced that a new species would be joining the war effort against the Hollow Swarm, a violent, endless mass of biological ships that had already devoured 6 worlds along the Outer Rim. The Council said this new species was called humanity, and that despite their short lives and their strange, fragile bodies, they had proven themselves capable in smaller conflicts closer to their home system. I laughed when I heard it. Many of us did. We had seen recordings of humans before. We had seen their wars, their arguments, their strange customs of singing before battle and touching each other's shoulders for comfort. We had seen them cry, actually cry, water leaking from their eyes when they lost someone close to them. To my people, this was almost embarrassing to watch. A true warrior does not weep. A true warrior does not need comfort from another. We are each our own fortress, alone and unbroken. So when I learned that a squad of humans would be assigned to fight beside my unit on the frontier world of Calder's Reach, I requested, quite seriously, to be transferred elsewhere. My request was denied. My commander, an old and weathered Kryvith named Draxor Ven, told me that the Council's decision was final, and that whether I respected these humans or not, I would fight beside them, and I would keep my unit alive by working with them, not against them. I obeyed, because obedience is also a form of strength among my people. But I did not have to like it. The humans arrived on a transport ship 3 days later. I stood at the landing platform with the rest of my unit, arms crossed, already forming my judgments before their doors had even opened. When the ramp lowered, I expected to see soldiers built for war, at least in some way that matched their reputation. Instead, I saw creatures barely taller than my shoulder, with soft, round faces and strange, expressive mouths that moved constantly, even when they were not speaking important words. There were 6 of them. Their leader stepped forward first. She had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and a way of walking that suggested she was not afraid of anything in front of her, even though I knew, biologically, she should have been terrified simply standing near me. I am nearly twice her height. My skin is layered with natural plating that can stop most low-grade weapons fire. My hands alone could crush the bones in her arm without much effort. She looked up at me, extended a small hand, and said, "Elena Marsh, good to meet you." I stared at the hand for a long moment before I understood the gesture. Slowly, carefully, I touched her fingers with 2 of mine, the way I had seen in the recordings. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She simply smiled, as if this strange first contact between our 2 species was nothing more than a pleasant afternoon greeting. "Threll," I said, "of the Kryvith." "I know," she said. "We studied your people before we came. Impressive fighters. No offense, but you all seem a little intense." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all. Over the following days, I watched the humans prepare for the coming battle, and every part of what I saw confused me. Before their training exercises, they made jokes with one another, laughing loudly even when the topic was death or danger. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Daniel Voss, told a story about nearly losing his hand during a previous conflict, and the others laughed until tears came to their eyes. I did not understand how such a memory could produce laughter instead of shame. At night, I saw them gather in small groups, sharing food, telling stories about their families, showing each other small images of people they had left behind. A young soldier named Owen Bell kept a photograph of a woman he called his sister tucked inside his jacket, and every evening, without fail, he would look at it before he slept. Among my people, this would be seen as a distraction, a weakness. Attachments to others make a warrior vulnerable, give the enemy something to threaten, something to exploit. We are trained from birth to release such bonds, to see every ally as replaceable, every loss as acceptable if it serves the greater strategy. I had lost brothers and sisters in battle before, Kriveth I had trained beside for decades, and I had grieved for exactly 1 hour, as tradition demanded, before returning to my duties as though nothing had changed. I found myself, against my better judgment, studying these humans the way a scientist studies an unfamiliar creature. Why did they laugh in the face of danger? Why did they cling to photographs and old stories instead of preparing their minds for the coming fight? Why did the smallest among them, a quiet woman named Nora Hale, spend an hour every night writing letters to someone who could not possibly receive them in time, given the speed of our approaching deployment? I asked Draxer Vin about this, hoping he would share my confusion, perhaps even confirm that these humans were as unprepared as I believed. Instead, my commander only looked at me with an expression I had rarely seen on his weathered face. "You misunderstand them, Threll," he said. "Watch closely before you judge. There is more happening in their minds than you realize." I did not believe him, not yet. 3 days before we were to deploy toward Calder's Reach, I found myself standing near the training yard where the human squad practiced their combat drills. I watched as they moved through simulated attacks, their coordination sloppy compared to Kriveth precision, their formations loose, their reactions delayed by what I assumed was simple biological weakness. And yet, there was something else there too, something I could not immediately name. When one of them stumbled, another was there instantly to catch them, without hesitation, without calculation of risk or reward. When their simulated enemy targeted the smallest among them, the largest human threw himself into the path without a second's pause. It was inefficient. It was by every standard I had been taught, foolish. But it was also, in some strange way, beautiful to watch. Elena Marsh approached me after the drill ended, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "You've been staring at us all week," she said, not unkindly. "Something on your mind, big guy?" "I do not understand your people," I admitted, the words feeling strange as I spoke them aloud. Kriveth do not often admit confusion. You laugh before battle. You carry photographs instead of weapons in your hearts. You throw yourselves toward danger to protect one another, even when it serves no strategic purpose. Elena tilted her head, studying me the way I had been studying her. "It serves a purpose," she said quietly. "Just not the kind your people are trained to see." "Then explain it to me." She smiled, but there was something serious beneath it, something older than her years. "Maybe after the battle," she said. "Ask me again if we're both still breathing." I did not understand her answer then. I told myself it was simply another human strangeness, another piece of evidence that these small, fragile creatures were not built for real war, not the kind my people had waged across 1,000 battlefields. That night, as I prepared my equipment for the coming deployment, I allowed myself one private thought, one I would never have spoken aloud to another Kriveth, one that shames me now when I remember it. I did not fear the battle ahead. I had never truly feared battle, not in 300 years of fighting across the stars. What I feared, in that quiet moment before sleep, was something smaller and more selfish than any enemy blade or burning ship. I feared that history would remember me as a warrior who fought beside children. I feared that my name, carried through the long memory of my people, would forever be tied to a squad of soft, weeping, laughing creatures who could not possibly understand what real strength meant. I did not yet know how wrong I was. I did not yet know that within a matter of days, everything I believed about strength, about fear, and about the meaning of standing beside another living being in the face of death would be broken apart and rebuilt into something I could never have imagined. The transport ship's engines roared to life beneath me as we began our final approach toward Calder's Reach, toward the battle that would change everything I understood about courage. I gripped my weapon and closed my eyes, unaware that the true lesson of this war had nothing to do with strength at all. The doors of the landing craft blew open before we had even touched the ground, and the first thing I saw was the sky itself burning. Calder's Reach had been a quiet mining world, home to a small colony of workers who extracted rare minerals from its rocky surface. By the time our ships arrived, the hollow swarm had already reduced half the colony to ruin. Their vessels moved like living things, pulsing and grasping, tearing through steel structures as easily as flesh. The air was thick with smoke, and the strange, sour smell of swarm biology, a scent that clung to the back of my throat and refused to leave. I ordered my unit forward the moment our boots touched the ground, moving in the tight, disciplined formation my people have used for centuries. Behind us came the human squad, spreading out in a wider pattern that looked, to my trained eye, dangerously exposed. I had expected this. I had expected them to break formation entirely once the real fighting began, to freeze, to run, to prove every doubt I carried about their capability. None of that happened. The first wave of swarm creatures came at us from the ruined mining tower ahead, dozens of them pouring out of a shattered doorway like water bursting through a broken dam. I raised my weapon and began firing in smooth, practiced movements, each shot placed with the precision of 3 centuries of training. Beside me, I heard the humans open fire as well, their weapons louder and less refined than ours, but no less effective. Daniel Voss, the broad-shouldered man who had told the story about his hand, threw himself flat against a fallen support beam and fired upward at a creature climbing the tower wall, dropping it before it could reach the colonists trapped inside. Owen Bell, the young soldier with the photograph of his sister, moved without hesitation to shield a wounded miner who had stumbled into the open, taking the full impact of a glancing strike meant for the civilian instead. I watched this happen and felt something twist inside my chest, something I did not have a name for yet. Owen was thrown backward by the force of the blow, his armor cracked, blood already staining the fabric beneath. And yet he rose again within seconds, weapon still in hand, moving to rejoin the fight, as though the injury had been nothing more than an inconvenience. "Fall back and treat that wound," I called out to him, my voice carrying the authority I used with my own soldiers. "No time," Owen shouted back, already firing again. "They need us here." It was not strategic. It was not efficient. A wounded soldier should retreat, should preserve their strength for later engagement, should not risk further injury for the sake of momentum. And yet something in his voice, something fierce and unwavering, told me that no order I gave would move him from that position while others still needed protecting. The battle stretched on, wave after wave of swarm creatures pressing against our defensive line. I fought as I always had, cold and precise, each movement calculated to preserve my own strength and eliminate threats with maximum efficiency. But as the hours passed, I found myself watching the humans more than I watched the enemy, and what I saw continued to unravel everything I believed about them. There was a moment, deep into the fighting, when a swarm creature broke through our flank and moved directly toward Nora Hale, the quiet woman who wrote letters every night to someone who could not receive them. She was reloading her weapon, exposed, seconds away from being struck down. I was too far to reach her in time. My mind, trained for centuries to calculate odds and outcomes, had already accepted her loss as unavoidable. Elena Marsh did not accept it. She threw herself across the open ground, tackling Nora out of the creature's path, taking the impact meant for her fellow soldier across her own shoulder instead. I heard her cry out in pain, a sound that should have signaled weakness, should have signaled the kind of fragile collapse I expected from her species. Instead, she rolled to her feet within seconds, blood soaking through her sleeve, and fired 3 precise shots into the creature that had struck her, ending its advance before it could reach either of them. "You are injured," I said, moving to her side once the immediate threat had passed. "You should withdraw." Elena looked at me, breathing hard, sweat and blood mixing on her face. "She's my responsibility," she said simply, as though this explained everything. "I brought her out here. I don't leave people behind, even at the cost of your own survival." Especially then, I did not understand her answer. I told myself it was simple recklessness, the kind of behavior that would eventually get her killed, proof that human instincts were poorly suited for the discipline of real war. And yet, even as I thought this, some quiet part of me had begun to notice a pattern I could not ignore. Every human soldier in that squad had, at some point during the battle, placed themselves between danger and another living being, human or otherwise, without a single moment of hesitation or calculation. They were not being reckless. They were choosing something, again and again, in the middle of chaos and fire and death, and I did not yet understand what that something was. The battle reached its most dangerous point as the sun began to set behind the ruined mining towers, casting long orange shadows across the battlefield. A massive swarm creature, larger than anything we had faced that day, emerged from the depths of the mining shaft, its many limbs tearing through the remaining defensive barriers as though they were made of paper. My unit moved to engage it directly, following the tactics we had trained for centuries to execute, tactics built around overwhelming firepower and coordinated precision strikes. It was not enough. The creature was faster than our scans had predicted, its movements erratic and difficult to track. Within moments, 2 of my own Krevith soldiers had fallen, their armor breached, their bodies still. I felt no immediate grief, only the cold calculation my training demanded, already recalculating our remaining strength, already adjusting our formation to compensate for the loss. It was Elena Marsh's voice that broke through the chaos, sharp and clear despite the roar of battle around us. "Threll, on your left, now." I turned in time to see the creature's massive limbs sweeping toward me, faster than I had accounted for, faster than my own reflexes could fully answer. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, I understood, with the cold certainty of a warrior who has faced death many times before, that I would not be able to move clear of the strike in time. And then something small and impossibly fast collided with my side, driving me sideways with far more force than her small frame should have carried. Elena Marsh threw her entire body against mine, using every ounce of strength she possessed to push me out of the creature's path. The limb struck the ground where I had been standing only a moment before, cratering the earth with enough force to have shattered even my reinforced armor. We hit the ground together, hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs in a way I had not experienced in decades. When I looked up, Elena was already rolling away, already raising her weapon toward the creature, already fighting again, as though she had not just placed herself in the path of a blow that could have killed her. "Why?" I demanded, my voice rougher than I intended, as I rose back to my feet beside her. "Why would you risk yourself for me? I am not of your species. I am not your responsibility." There was no strategic advantage in that action. Elena did not look at me as she answered, her attention fixed on the battle still raging around us. "You're standing next to me," she said, as though this were the simplest explanation in the entire universe. "That makes you mine to protect. We can talk about the rest later, if we live." I had no answer for her. In 300 years of warfare, across 1,000 battles on 100 worlds, no one had ever spoken to me with such simple, absolute conviction about a bond that had existed for less than a week. The creature fell eventually, brought down by a combined assault from both our units working together in a way that no longer resembled 2 separate forces fighting side by side, but something closer to a single coordinated whole. As the last of the swarm creatures retreated into the darkness beyond the ruined colony, silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the distant crackle of dying fires and the ragged breathing of exhausted soldiers. I stood amid the wreckage, my armor scorched, my body aching in ways I had not felt in years, and looked around at the small, fragile creatures who had fought beside me that day. 2 of my own Krivith brothers lay dead upon the ground, and I felt the familiar cold detachment my training demanded, the careful hour of grief that tradition allowed before duty resumed. But when I looked at Owen Bell kneeling beside a fallen human soldier, tears streaming freely down his face as he pressed his hand against a wound that could not be healed, I felt something entirely different stirring within me, something I had spent 3 centuries training myself never to feel. I did not yet have a name for it. I only knew that it frightened me more than anything the hollow swarm had thrown against us that day, and that frightened me most of all. Night fell over Calder's Reach, and with it came a strange quiet that felt heavier than the battle itself. The surviving colonists had been moved into the underground shelters, safe for now behind reinforced doors. Our combined force set up a temporary camp among the ruins of the mining colony, and for the first time since our arrival, there was nothing to fight, nothing to calculate, nothing to do but sit with what had happened. I found myself unable to settle. My body, trained for endurance far beyond human limits, did not need rest the way theirs did, and so I walked the perimeter of our camp long after most of the humans had gathered around a small fire near the center of the ruins. I told myself I was checking for remaining threats, ensuring the safety of the camp. In truth, I was avoiding something, though I did not yet understand what. It was Elena who found me eventually, standing near a fallen wall on the edge of the firelight, her injured shoulder wrapped in a rough bandage. She sat down on a piece of broken concrete nearby without asking permission, the way humans so often did, acting as though space belonged to everyone, rather than being claimed and defended. "You've been avoiding the fire," she said. It was not a question. "I do not require warmth," I answered, which was true, though it was not the real reason. "That's not why we sit around it," Elena said, looking out toward the small group gathered near the flames. Daniel Voss was telling another story, his hands moving through the air as he spoke, and even from this distance I could hear the others laughing softly, a sound that seemed strange against the backdrop of a battlefield still smoldering in the darkness. We sit around it because it reminds us we're still here, together. That matters more than the warmth. I considered her words carefully before I spoke again. "2 of my brothers died today," I said. "By the customs of my people, I have already completed my grieving. 1 hour, as tradition demands. I should feel nothing further." Elena turned to look at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Did it work? I hesitated, and in that hesitation, I gave her an answer more honest than any words could have provided. "No," I admitted quietly. "It did not work." "Then maybe your tradition is wrong," she said, not unkindly. "Grief doesn't run on a schedule, Threll. It doesn't care how disciplined you are. It just is what it is, for as long as it needs to be." I found myself wanting to argue with her, to defend the customs that had shaped every part of my existence, customs that had allowed my people to survive countless wars without breaking beneath the weight of endless loss. And yet something in me, something new and unfamiliar, resisted the argument before it could fully form. "Explain something to me," I said instead. "Earlier today, you asked me to wait until after the battle to understand your people. We are both still breathing. Explain it to me now." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire in the distance. "What do you want to know? Why did you place yourself in danger for me, for Nora? Why does your entire squad move as though each of your lives matters less than the life beside you? By every measure my people use to judge strength, this behavior should have gotten all of you killed today. And yet you fought as well as any warrior I have ever stood beside. I do not understand how these two things can both be true." Elena pulled her knees up toward her chest, wrapping her uninjured arm around them, and for a moment she looked younger than her rank and her steady voice had suggested. "Where I come from," she said, "there's an old saying, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward anyway, because of what you love, not despite being scared of losing it. Your people feel fear then, openly, without shame. Every single one of us," Elena said. "I was terrified today. The whole time, my hands were shaking before that creature ever came near you. I just didn't let the fear stop me from doing what needed to be done." "That is not how fear functions among the Kryvith," I said. "We are trained from birth to eliminate it. A warrior who feels fear cannot act with precision, cannot be trusted in battle. We remove it, layer by layer, until nothing remains but discipline and purpose." Elena studied me for a long moment, and there was something in her eyes that I had not expected. Not pity, exactly, but something close to it, something gentler, and somehow more troubling. "Threll," she said slowly, "if you can't feel fear, how do you know what you love enough to protect?" The question struck something deep inside me, something I did not have words for. I opened my mouth to answer, to explain the Kryvith understanding of duty and loyalty, the bonds of unit and command that held our forces together without the messy interference of emotion. But the words would not come. For the first time in 3 centuries, I found myself without an answer to a question that should have been simple. Elena did not press further. She simply rose to her feet, wincing slightly as her injured shoulder shifted, and offered me a small, tired smile. "Come, sit by the fire," she said. "You don't have to talk. Just sit with us. Sometimes that's the whole point." I did not move at first. Every instinct trained into me over 300 years told me to remain apart, to preserve the discipline of solitude that had always defined my strength. And yet, as I watched her walk back toward the small circle of light and laughter, something pulled at me that felt stronger than 3 centuries of training. I followed her. The humans made space for me without comment, as though my presence among them was simply expected, simply natural, despite everything that separated our species. Daniel Voss finished his story, something about a fishing trip gone wrong on a world I had never heard of, and the group laughed again, warm and unguarded. Owen Bell, his eyes still red from earlier grief, offered me a strange piece of food from a small packet, explaining it was called a ration bar, and that I probably would not enjoy it, but that sharing food was simply what they did. I ate it. It tasted of nothing remarkable, and yet something about the gesture settled into me in a way that no ceremonial meal among my own people ever had. Nora Hale, quiet and watchful, sat across the fire, writing in a small notebook by the dim light. I found myself curious about her habit, the letters she wrote every night to someone who could not receive them in time. "Who do you write to?" I asked her. Nora looked up, surprised, perhaps, that I had spoken directly to her. "My mother," she said softly, "back home. I know she won't get these for weeks, maybe months, depending on the transport schedules, but I write them anyway, every night. It helps me remember why I'm out here. Even though the letters may never reach her in time to matter?" Nora smiled, small and sad. "They matter to me, Threll. That's enough." I sat with that thought for a long while, watching the fire crackle against the darkness, listening to the quiet conversations around me. I began to understand, slowly and imperfectly, that these humans were not weak because they carried photographs and wrote unsent letters and clung to one another in moments of danger. They were not fragile because they wept openly or laughed loudly in the face of death. These things were not failures of discipline. They were the very source of the strength I had witnessed on the battlefield that day. They did not fight despite their fear, their grief, their love for one another. They fought because of it. Later that night, as the fire burned low and most of the humans had drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel Voss found me still sitting near the ashes, unable to settle my thoughts into any pattern I recognized. "You're thinking too hard," he said, settling down beside me with a groan, favoring a leg that had taken damage during the fight. I can practically hear the gears turning. "I am trying to understand something," I admitted. "Something about your people that does not fit within my understanding of strength." Daniel chuckled softly. "Let me guess. The whole throwing ourselves in front of danger thing." "Among other things, yes." "You know what I think about, right before something bad happens," Daniel said, staring up at the unfamiliar stars overhead. "I think about my brother. He's got 2 kids back home. I think about the fact that if I don't come back, somebody's got to be the one who tells them. And I think about the people standing next to me, the ones counting on me not to freeze up. That's not weakness, Threll. That's the whole reason we hold together when everything else is falling apart. Your species builds its strength on connection," I said slowly, thinking aloud as much as speaking to him, "where mine builds its strength on separation." "Something like that," Daniel agreed. "Look, I'm not saying your way is wrong. You lot have survived a long time doing things your way. But watching you today, out there on the field, I don't think you're as separate as you think you are. You went cold and quiet when your brothers died, but you didn't look away from Owen crying over that soldier. Most people who really don't feel anything, they look away. I had no response for him. He was right, and the recognition of that truth unsettled me more than any wound I had taken that day. "Get some rest, big guy," Daniel said, rising slowly to his feet. "Tomorrow's probably going to be worse before it gets better." The scouts picked up movement deeper in the ruins, bigger numbers than what we saw today. I remained by the dying fire long after he had gone, turning over everything I had witnessed and heard that night. I thought of Elena's question, the one that had left me without an answer. If I could not feel fear, how did I know what I loved enough to protect? I thought of my own people, my brothers who had died that day, the hour of ceremonial grief that had done nothing to ease the weight I still carried in my chest. I thought of 3 centuries spent perfecting the art of feeling nothing, and wondered, for the first time in all those years, whether I had mistaken emptiness for strength. The stars above Calder's Reach were unfamiliar to me, distant points of light scattered across an alien sky. I found myself thinking of Nora's letters, written faithfully every night to a mother who might never read them in time, and understood, with a clarity that startled me, that the writing of those letters was not weakness at all. It was defiance. It was hope, stubbornly maintained in the face of uncertainty and danger. It was a declaration that something mattered enough to be worth the effort, even against the odds of failure. I did not sleep that night, not because my body required none, but because my mind would not be still. Somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp, the hollow swarm was gathering its strength for another assault, larger and more dangerous than anything we had faced so far. And somewhere within myself, something old and rigid had begun, slowly and painfully, to crack open. By the time the first light of dawn touched the ruined towers of Calder's Reach, I understood that whatever battle waited for us in the coming hours, I would not face it as the same warrior who had landed on this world only a day before. The scouts had not exaggerated. When the second wave of the hollow swarm emerged from the deep tunnels beneath the mining colony, it came in numbers that dwarfed everything we had faced the day before. I stood at the edge of our defensive line as the first shapes appeared on the horizon, dark masses moving across the broken landscape like a living tide. My tactical instincts, honed across 3 centuries of warfare, calculated the odds within seconds, and the numbers were not favorable. Draxer Venn stood beside me, his weathered face grim as he studied the same approaching horde. "We do not have the numbers to hold this line," he said quietly, speaking only to me. "Command protocol dictates a fallback to the secondary position, sacrificing the outer colony to preserve the majority of our forces." I understood the logic. It was sound, by every measure my people used to calculate the value of a battle. The outer colony held perhaps 30 remaining civilians, workers who had not made it to the deeper shelters in time. 30 lives against the preservation of our entire combined force. The mathematics were simple, and my training told me the answer was obvious. Elena Marsh, standing nearby, had heard every word. "You're talking about leaving people behind," she said, her voice sharp and cold in a way I had not heard from her before. "We are talking about survival," Draxer Venn replied, not unkindly, but with the flat certainty of a commander who had made such calculations many times before. 30 lives cannot be weighed against the destruction of this entire force, human and Krevith alike. "Then we don't accept that as the choice," Elena said. "We hold the line, we get those 30 people out, and then we fall back, together, with everyone who came here." "That plan carries significant risk of total failure," Draxer Venn said. "The swarm's numbers exceed our projections by a considerable margin." "With respect," Elena said, and there was nothing soft in the words at all. "I've heard that argument before, on other worlds, from other commanders who thought the math was more important than the people the math was supposed to protect. I'm not leaving anyone behind. Not today." I watched this exchange unfold, and something within me, something that had been shifting and cracking since the previous night, finally gave way entirely. I thought of the letters Nora wrote each night, defiant against the odds of ever being read. I thought of Owen Bell throwing himself in front of a stranger without hesitation. I thought of Elena's own body colliding with mine, driving me clear of a blow that would have ended my life, purely because I was standing beside her when danger came. I thought of Elena's question from the night before, still unanswered in my mind. If I could not feel fear, how did I know what I loved enough to protect? "I will hold the eastern flank," I said, the words leaving me before I had fully decided to speak them. "If the humans move to extract the remaining colonists, I will ensure the swarm cannot flank their position while they work." Draxer Venn turned to look at me with something between surprise and concern. "Threll, this deviates from established protocol. the mathematics of this engagement remain unfavorable. Then we will change the mathematics, I said, and for the first time in 300 years, I felt something stirring in my chest that I finally recognized for what it was. It was not the cold calculation of duty. It was not the disciplined absence of feeling that my people called strength. It was fear. Real, sharp, undeniable fear. Not for my own survival, but for the small, fragile creatures who had shown me, in less than 2 days, something about strength and connection that 3 centuries of Krivith tradition had never taught me. I feared losing Elena, and Daniel, and Owen, and Nora, and every soldier who had chosen, again and again, to stand beside another life instead of standing alone. And rather than paralyzing me, that fear moved through my body like fire, sharp and clarifying, burning away the last of my old certainties. Draxer Ven studied me for a long moment, and something in his ancient eyes suggested he understood more than he was saying. "Then hold the flank, Threll," he said finally. "I will commit additional forces to support your position. May your ancestors watch over what you have chosen." The battle that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in 3 centuries of warfare. The swarm descended upon our position in overwhelming numbers, and for the first time, I did not fight with the cold detachment that had defined every previous engagement of my long life. I fought with something else entirely, something that burned hot and urgent beneath my carefully maintained discipline. Every strike I made was measured against a single question that had never mattered to me before. Would this action keep the humans safe long enough to complete their mission? Elena led her squad into the outer colony, moving through the chaos with a speed and precision that no longer surprised me. I watched, even as I fought to hold the eastern flank, as she and her soldiers moved from building to building, gathering the trapped colonists, shepherding them toward the extraction point with a calm efficiency that belied the terror I now understood she carried within her at every moment. A group of swarm creatures broke through my flank position, moving fast toward the extraction route where the colonists were being led to safety. I felt the fear sharpen within me, no longer an abstract concept, but a living, burning presence that drove my body forward with a speed I had not accessed in decades. I met the creatures head-on, my weapon firing in rapid succession, my body absorbing blows I would normally have avoided through careful positioning, because there was no time for careful positioning, only the desperate need to keep that path clear. I took a wound across my shoulder, deep enough that I felt it clearly despite my natural resilience, and did not slow. I took another across my side moments later, and still I did not fall back. Somewhere behind me, I could hear Elena's voice calling out coordinates, directing her people towards safety, and I understood, with a clarity that startled me, that I would rather fall in that moment than allow a single swarm creature to reach the path she and her soldiers were using. This was fear as the humans understood it. Not paralysis, not weakness, but a fire that demanded action, that transformed love and connection into something fierce and unstoppable. The creatures pressed harder, sensing perhaps that our line was weakening. I fought on, my armor cracking, blood mixing with the dust of the ruined colony beneath my feet. Draxer Ven arrived with reinforcements moments later, and together we drove the remaining swarm creatures back from the flank, buying just enough time for Elena's squad to complete the extraction. 30 colonists emerged from the ruined buildings, frightened but alive, moving quickly toward the transport that would carry them to safety. Elena moved among them, counting heads, checking for injuries, her own wounded shoulder forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Daniel Voss carried an elderly woman who could not walk on her own, his broad shoulders bearing her weight without complaint. Owen Bell guided 2 frightened children toward the transport, speaking to them in a soft, steady voice that carried none of the terror I now understood he must have felt. It was Nora Hale who spotted the danger first. A massive swarm creature emerging from the collapsed mining shaft directly behind the fleeing colonists, its path leading straight toward the children Owen was guiding to safety. "Owen, behind you!" she screamed, her voice cracking with a fear she made no effort to hide. Owen turned, saw the creature bearing down, and made a choice that required no calculation at all. He pushed the 2 children forward toward the transport, shouting for them to run, and turned to face the creature alone, his weapon raised despite the impossible odds before him. I do not know how I crossed the distance between us so quickly. I remember only the burning certainty that I could not allow this young soldier, who carried his sister's photograph against his heart every night, to fall alone against a creature he had no reasonable chance of surviving. I threw myself into the creature's path, driving my full weight and strength into a strike that would have been impossible only days before, when my body still moved with the careful, measured discipline of a warrior who calculated every risk before acting. The creature staggered under the force of my assault, and Owen, rather than retreating to safety as I had hoped, stood his ground beside me, adding his own weapon fire to the assault. Together, in a combination of Krivith's strength and human determination, we brought the creature down, its massive form collapsing into the dust only meters from where the children had reached the safety of the transport. Owen turned to me, breathing hard, his young face pale but resolute. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did not run," I said, still processing the strange new sensations moving through my body. "Even facing a creature of that size, alone, you chose to stand and protect those children rather than save yourself." "Wasn't really a choice," Owen said, managing a tired, shaky smile. "Some things you just do." I understood, in that moment, exactly what he meant. For the first time in 300 years, I had acted not from calculated duty, but from something that burned hotter and more urgent than any strategic assessment I had ever made. I had acted from fear, real and sharp and undeniable. Fear born entirely from the fact that I had come to care, in less than 2 days, about the survival of creatures I had once dismissed as unworthy of standing beside me in battle. The remaining swarm forces retreated as the sun climbed higher over Calder's Reach, driven back by the combined strength of our forces working not as two separate armies, but as something unified, something that had discovered, in the crucible of shared danger, a strength neither species could have achieved alone. As the battlefield finally fell quiet, I found Elena near the transport, tending to a wound on her arm while directing the final evacuation of the colonists. She looked up as I approached, taking in my scorched and battered armor, the blood still seeping from the wound across my shoulder. "You held the flank," she said. It was not quite a question, but it carried the weight of one. "I did," I said, "and I understand now, Elena Marsh, the answer to the question you asked me last night." She waited, saying nothing, letting me find the words on my own. "If I could not feel fear," I said slowly, "I would not have known what I had come to love enough to protect. Today, for the first time in 3 centuries, I felt it. And rather than breaking me, it made me stronger than I have ever been." Elena's tired face softened into something that was not quite a smile, but held all the warmth of one. "Welcome to the club, big guy," she said quietly. "It's not always comfortable, but it's real." Behind us, the last of the transport ships lifted off, carrying the rescued colonists towards safety. The battle for Calder's Reach was not yet over, but something within me had shifted permanently, a change I knew, with absolute certainty, could never be undone. I had come to this world believing that strength meant the absence of fear. I was leaving this battlefield understanding, for the first time in my long life, that true strength had never been about the absence of feeling at all. It had always been about what a warrior chose to do with it. The final assault came 3 days later, and I remember every second of it with a clarity that no ceremonial discipline could have given me. The Hollow Swarm, wounded but not defeated by our victories at the outer colony, had gathered what remained of its forces deep within the planet's largest mining complex, a vast network of tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the surface of Calder's Reach. Command intelligence suggested this was the source of the swarm's presence on the planet, a central hive structure that, if destroyed, would end the threat entirely. Command intelligence also suggested that any force sent to destroy it faced a high probability of catastrophic losses. I had changed enough, in the days since my arrival on this world, that I no longer needed Draxer Venn to explain what those words truly meant. High probability of catastrophic losses meant that many of us, perhaps most of us, would not return from the depths of that mining complex. Elena gathered her squad the night before the assault, and for once, there was no laughter around the fire. Daniel Voss sat quietly, cleaning his weapon with slow, careful movements. Owen Bell held the photograph of his sister in his hands, studying it with an intensity I had come to recognize as his particular way of finding strength before danger. Nora Hale wrote her nightly letter, though I noticed her hand trembled slightly as she formed the words. I sat among them, no longer at the edge of the firelight, but within the circle itself, and found that I no longer needed to ask why they gathered this way before facing what might be their final battle. I understood now. The fire was not for warmth. It was a declaration that they were still together, still alive, still choosing one another despite everything the coming hours might demand. "You don't have to come with us into those tunnels," Elena said to me quietly, as the others settled into an uneasy rest around the dying flames. "Your people have already given enough on this world." "I am coming," I said, without hesitation. "There is no version of tomorrow's battle where I allow you to descend into that darkness without standing beside you." Elena studied my face for a long moment in the flickering light. 3 days ago, you couldn't have said that sentence. 3 days ago, I admitted, I did not understand what it meant to fear losing someone enough to change how I fought. She reached out and touched my arm, briefly, the way I had seen humans do with one another countless times over the past days, a small gesture that carried more weight than any formal ceremony my own people practiced. "Get some rest if you can," she said. "Tomorrow is going to test everything we've got." I did not rest, not truly, but I sat with the humans through the remaining hours of darkness, and found a strange comfort in simply being present among them, sharing the weight of the fear we all now carried openly, without shame. The assault began at dawn, our combined forces descending into the mining complex through 3 separate entry points, moving through narrow tunnels lit only by our weapons and the dim emergency lighting still functioning within the ancient structure. The deeper we moved, the more the walls seemed to pulse with a strange organic rhythm, evidence of the swarm's biological infrastructure spreading through the very stone around us. The fighting, when it came, was unlike anything I had experienced even during the previous battles on this world. The tunnels forced us into close quarters, eliminating the advantages of ranged combat that had served us on the open battlefield. Creatures emerged from every direction, from side passages and collapsed sections, and even from openings in the ceiling above us, and within minutes, our carefully coordinated formation had dissolved into a desperate, close-fought struggle for survival. I fought beside Elena through corridor after corridor, our movements now perfectly synchronized despite the vast differences in our physiology, each of us instinctively covering the gaps the other could not reach. When a creature lunged from a side passage toward her exposed flank, I was already moving to intercept it before conscious thought had fully formed. When a swarm creature nearly overwhelmed me from behind, pressing me against a tunnel wall with more strength than I had anticipated, it was Elena's precise shots that freed me, striking with an accuracy that spoke to complete trust in exactly where I would be standing. Deeper into the complex, we found Daniel Voss and his portion of the squad pinned down in a wide chamber, swarm creatures pouring in from multiple directions faster than they could be repelled. I heard Daniel's voice over the comm system, steady despite the chaos, calling for support while continuing to lay down covering fire for 2 wounded soldiers being dragged toward cover. Elena did not hesitate. She led our combined force directly into the chamber, and I fought at her side as we carved a path through the swarm creatures toward Daniel's position. The fighting there was the fiercest I had yet witnessed, and more than once I felt certain that one or both of us would not survive the next exchange. And yet, through it all, the fear that had once seemed like it would consume me instead sharpened every movement, every decision, until I was fighting with a precision that somehow exceeded anything 3 centuries of Kriveth discipline had ever produced. We reached Daniel's position as the last of the immediate threat was cleared, and I saw, with a relief that surprised me in its intensity, that both wounded soldiers were still breathing, though barely. Daniel looked up at Elena and then at me, exhaustion and something like gratitude written plainly across his face. "Knew you two would come," he said, managing a tired grin despite the blood staining his sleeve. "Never doubted it for a second." We pressed onward, deeper into the heart of the complex, where the pulsing organic walls gave way to a massive central chamber, housing the source of the swarm's presence on Calder's Reach. What we found there defied easy description. A vast biological structure that seemed to breathe with a slow, terrible rhythm, surrounded by the largest concentration of swarm creatures we had encountered since our arrival. The battle for that chamber tested every soldier who entered it, human and Krivith alike. I fought without pause, without the careful preservation of strength that had once defined my approach to combat, driven instead by a fierce determination to see every member of our combined force survive what waited within that terrible room. Nora Hale, whom I had come to think of as quiet and gentle, fought with a ferocity that surprised even me, protecting a fallen colleague with a desperate courage that left no doubt about the strength hidden beneath her soft-spoken exterior. It was Owen Bell who found himself in the gravest danger, isolated from the rest of our force by a sudden collapse of tunnel debris that separated him from support, facing 3 of the largest swarm creatures we had yet encountered, alone in the flickering darkness of a side passage. I heard his voice over the comm, steady despite the fear I now understood he must have been feeling. "I can hold them," he said. "Get to the central structure. Complete the mission. Don't worry about me." Elena's response was immediate and absolute. "We are not leaving anyone behind." "I told you that already." She turned toward the collapsed passage, and I moved with her without needing to be asked, both of us tearing through the debris with a strength born from desperation and the fierce refusal to accept the calculation that Owen's survival mattered less than the completion of our mission. We reached him just as the situation had become nearly impossible, his ammunition running low, the 3 creatures closing in from separate angles with no clear path of retreat available to him. I threw myself into the fray without hesitation, and for the first time in my long life, I understood completely what Elena had meant. Days before, when she said that standing beside someone made them yours to protect. I fought those creatures not with the cold precision of Krivith discipline, but with something fiercer, something born entirely from the fear of losing a young soldier who had taught me, through nothing more than his simple courage, what real strength truly meant. Elena fought beside me, and moments later Daniel arrived as well, and together we drove back the creatures threatening Owen's position, clearing a path that allowed all of us to press forward once again toward the central chamber. The final confrontation with the source of the Hollow Swarm's presence on Calder's Reach tested every resource our combined forces possessed. I will not recount every detail of that terrible struggle, the losses we suffered, the desperate coordination required to bring down a structure that seemed to regenerate its defenses even as we fought to destroy it. What I will say is that when the central structure finally collapsed, when the last of the swarm creatures fell silent around us, our combined force stood together amid the wreckage, wounded and exhausted, but alive. Nearly all of us. Alive. Elena had taken a wound during the final moments of the battle, a deep strike across her side that our medical teams worked frantically to stabilize as we made our way back through the tunnels toward the surface. I carried her myself through the final stretch of the journey, refusing to allow anyone else to bear that weight, and did not release her until we reached the medical transport waiting on the surface. She survived. I will not pretend the days that followed were easy ones, watching her recover slowly in the medical bay, while the rest of our combined force began the long process of rebuilding what the swarm had destroyed on Calder's Reach. But she survived, and in the quiet hours I spent beside her recovery bed, I found myself reflecting on everything this brief, brutal campaign had taught me about the nature of strength and fear. "You look thoughtful," Elena said one evening, her voice still weak but steady, as I sat beside her in the dim light of the medical bay. "I am thinking about my people," I admitted, "about everything I believed before I met you and your squad. We built our strength on the absence of fear, believing that feeling nothing made us unbreakable. I have come to understand how wrong that belief truly was." "And what do you understand now?" Elena asked, watching me with the same steady patience she had shown from our very first meeting. I considered the question carefully before answering, wanting to give her words worthy of everything I had learned. "Fear is not the enemy of strength," I said finally. "It is the proof of what we love enough to protect. My people spent centuries burning away our capacity to feel afraid, believing we were building warriors of unmatched discipline. Instead, we were building soldiers who no longer knew what they were truly fighting for." Elena reached out with her uninjured hand, and I took it carefully in my own, mindful of the vast difference in our size and strength. "You fought harder in these last few days than I've ever seen anyone fight," she said, "not because you stopped being afraid, because you finally let yourself feel it and used it as fuel instead of running from it." "I have you to thank for that lesson," I said. "You and Daniel, and Owen, and Nora, you showed me something my own people never could, in 300 years of tradition and discipline." "What's that?" "That the deepest strength does not come from standing alone," I said. "It comes from choosing, again and again, to stand beside another, even when fear tells you the cost might be everything." Elena smiled then, tired but genuine, and squeezed my hand with what strength remained in her injured body. "Welcome to being human, Threll," she said softly, "even if you're 8 feet tall and built like a tank." I returned to my people eventually, carrying the wounds of Calder's Reach, and something far deeper than any physical injury, a fundamental change in how I understood the nature of courage itself. Draxer Vin noticed the difference immediately, studying me with the same knowing patience he had shown throughout our time on that terrible, transformative world. "You are not the same warrior who left our homeworld," he said, not as an accusation, but as simple observation. "No," I agreed. "I am not, and I do not believe I ever wish to be that warrior again. I do not know how the rest of my people will receive what I have learned, whether the old traditions of the Krefith will ever make room for the truth I carried back from that battlefield. But I know this much with absolute certainty, a certainty that no amount of ceremonial discipline could ever have given me. I once believed that fear was a weakness to be burned away, a flaw to be eliminated through centuries of careful training. I know now that fear is something else entirely. It is the fire that burns brightest when we finally understand what we cannot bear to lose. It is not the enemy of courage, but its very source, the proof that somewhere beneath every warrior's armor there remains something worth protecting, someone worth standing beside, no matter the cost. I battled beside humans on a broken world at the edge of known space, and in doing so, I learned what fear truly is. Not a weakness, as my people had always taught me, but the truest measure of what we are willing to fight for. And I would not trade that lesson, no matter how it was earned, for all 3 centuries of hollow strength that came before it.